When people clap before a program starts, which everybody does because they're such lovely people, I'm always reminded what Bishop Fulton Sheen once said, which was that when people clap before he starts his talks, he's always sure they're clapping out of faith and hope, and afterwards he's pretty convinced they're clapping out of charity. So, but we take your clapping for what it is. So we were going to, Karen very diligently put together the pictures of the book, you know, the illustrations, and we were going to read the book to the accompaniment of the illustrations. But because, well, who knows what reasons, the gods did not care for that. Milo is going to show the pictures, and we are going to read. Okay. Oh, Milo, good, you stood up. Okay. All right.
And I just want to say, although I said, Nancy, I think we should practice, she said, oh no, we'll just go with it. So this is the first time through. Nancy loved reading more than recess. Whenever she tried talking about books, kids ignored her, or they shouted,
"Go away, library girl."
This made Nancy sad.
Why did they tease me about the library?
She wondered. The school library held Nancy's best friends. All those characters tucked into pages. She never felt lonely reading their stories. So, of course, the school library was Nancy's favorite place. She visited after class to talk about books with Miss Glenn, the librarian.
I wish I could come here on Saturdays.
Nancy sighed.
The public library is open. There's one near you.
Miss Glenn drew a map. Hope fluttered like pages turning in Nancy's heart. On Saturday, Nancy studied the map with her bicycle that she'd named Charger. She loved pretending he was a beautiful horse.
This will be a big adventure, just like in a book,
she explained. As Nancy raced down the sidewalk, her imagination soared. When they arrived, Nancy stared at the library for a long time.
Charger, this whole building is filled with books.
The stone faces and owls winked. Nancy thought she was dreaming. Inside, two librarians greeted Nancy.
Are kids allowed in here?
She asked. They smiled. Nancy felt certain the stone lions did too.
What do you like to read?
Miss Whitehead asked.
Horse books.
Come with us,
said Miss Long. They showed Nancy to a room with enough books to build a bridge to the moon. She planned to read them all. The next Saturday, Nancy returned on Charger. Beneath the stained glass window, she found a stack of books with a note.
Nancy, when you finish these, I have a new horse book for you, Miss Whitehead.
Nancy had to hide with these books. Otherwise, kids might pick on her. Then she saw the table, surrounded by magic light.
I'll be invisible under here,
she believed. By closing time, she'd read the stack and claimed the new horse book. Every Saturday, Nancy and Charger arrived when the library opened. She read through rows of fantasies, trilogies, diaries, anthologies, dictionaries, histories, biographies, and mysteries.
I can be anything when I grow up,
she realized. One day, Miss Whitehead asked,
Nancy, would you like to give a talk about horse books to other kids?
No,
she answered.
They'll make fun of me.
You're an expert,
Miss Long said.
What helps you feel brave?
Miss Whitehead asked. Nancy wasn't sure. She was afraid, but she didn't want to disappoint the librarians. They believed in her. Finally, she agreed. Brave was never how she felt around other kids.
What if I'm boring? What if they laugh? What if no one comes?
The library had become the place where she belonged. Failure would destroy that. The night before the event, Nancy couldn't sleep. She thought about Miss Whitehead's question. Charger helped her feel brave, but he couldn't go inside.
But my toy horses can,
she realized. The next morning, with the toy horses in a box, Nancy climbed on Charger. But managing both was too difficult. She lost her balance and over they went. The neighborhood milkman rushed toward her.
Nancy, are you all right?
Yes, but Charger's hurt. I have to speak at the library and I can't walk fast enough to get there on time. What should I do, Mr. Fishoff?
Gather the horses while I put Charger on your porch to rest. I'll drive you.
And they zoomed away. When Nancy faced the library audience, nerves nibbled at her, but she had to be calm. Horses could sense fear. A stampede was the last thing she needed now.
Let's make Charger proud,
she whispered to her toy herd. With her hand on a pretty pinto, she began her talk. All the kids listened, spellbound. When she finished, they applauded. Miss Whitehead and Miss Long glowed. On that glorious day, when the audience was gone, even the building celebrated Nancy's success. Nancy's Saturdays changed. Kids circled her with questions about books. She didn't need a magic hiding place anymore. Nancy had found her own magic. She knew what she wanted to do when she grew up, become a librarian. And she did. Because reading, Nancy knew, helped people find dreams of their own with the turn of every page.
Yeah, it was a good idea, Karen.
Every now and then.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
So Karen, how did this idea, besides my twisting your arm, no, I didn't do that. How did this happen?
Well, Nancy and I worked together in a Tulsa bookstore a little less than 100 years ago. And so, we got to be friends and we talked about our lives. And I knew that Nancy's childhood had not always been a wonderful experience. So, I thought about that. And then we left Tulsa and moved to Wisconsin. And then shortly after that, Nancy moved to Seattle. So, as you know, she became quite the success out here. But I never really got to see that. And then when we moved and lived in the Twin Cities, the library system brought Nancy in there. So I went with her and saw her success live and in person because she would pack those library auditoriums. And at the end, the people would line up down the aisle all the way out into the library to get pictures taken with her, get her to sign the books. And I thought, this woman has made a success out of herself for sure. And so I published my first book and thought, well, maybe there's a story there. So when I was in Seattle, I mentioned it to her and she said, well, okay. And so I started interviewing her, trying to find a storyline. And the long and the short of it is, it took 10 years to do that. But, the story was in there. I just had to find it. I know it reads like, of course, it happened just this way. But the story went lots of different ways. At one point, we were asking Nancy to remember her life when she was 8 years old, and it was a little sketchy at times. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just have Nancy as a character in books. And so I had her in a calico dress in a covered wagon, sort of Little House on the Prairie kind of. And so I created these different scenes and I wrote it in rhyme. Somehow I thought I could. And I was in a critique group and they kept saying, well, this is all very pretty, but it's just like picture postcards. What about Nancy? They kept asking about Nancy, so I'd write down their questions and I'd call her and ask, and slowly but surely we found the story. For the longest, people on Goodreads talk about the dramatic moment with the milkman. Nancy didn't even remember that for the longest time. She knew there was somebody. So we sort of patched together what we thought might have happened, and Sheryl patiently drew it perfectly, and Nancy looked at the art and said, "This isn't how it happened at all." And then she said, "Mr. Fishoff, the milkman." So you know, it was a process.
We had a grocer in there at one point.
Yes.
It was the grocer that helped you.
Yeah. Well, it was indeed. It was really Mr. Fishoff, and he really did drive me to the library. He was our milkman. I didn't know at the time that he and his wife were friends with my parents, and this will give you a little insight into my childhood. I honestly believed my mother was sending me off with a stranger to go to the library, and I was terrified the whole way there. But it was Mr. Fishoff. He did indeed drive me to the library. Miss Glenn, my school librarian, she introduced me to the first book that she recommended was My Father's Dragon. Some of you will surely remember that book. And Miss Whitehead and Miss Long were the librarians at the Parkman Branch Library in Detroit. And Miss Whitehead was the one that I ended up being, very, she really was a mentor. And as Karen, sort of captured it in the book, she really not even convinced me. It was Miss Whitehead who made such a difference in my life, who opened the world to me, and I wanted to become a children's librarian. When I was 10 years old, I wanted to be a children's librarian, just like Miss Whitehead, because I wanted to do for other kids what she did for me, and I did. I did become a children's librarian, and indeed my first job after library school at the University of Michigan was in the Detroit Public Library system. And so I wasn't at the Parkman Branch Library, which would have been like magical to work with Miss Whitehead, but I was her colleague, and that was just very, very, very special. So Sheryl, could you talk about, like you got the manuscript. Somehow we're not sure how Sasquatch Books published, bought Karen's book.
Right.
And here they are with, is it 500 words or less?
650 is what I
650?
Yeah.
Okay, they have this, here's this book, here's this manuscript, 650 words. And then we're not quite sure how, are we?
No, we have our editor and art director in the audience, and I never thought to ask. I mean, or maybe I did and I've forgotten how I was originally found, but I was found.
Okay, yeah, you were found.
I was found.
Okay. And then what? And then you get the manuscript.
Right, and we have, if we are able to put the slide
Milo,
on.
can you put those slides on?
If you don't
These
mind,
work.
the keynote ones. Just a little something I threw together in like 5 hours. I don't even know how long it took me. So I get the manuscript once I'm selected. There's quite a process from what I understand. The art director, usually, in my understanding of the process, will have several illustrators that they're looking at for that particular book, and they really do make a match to the book that they feel like would tell a different part of the story for the book, but match the manuscript. And usually, I believe there's a meeting with the editor. I might be making this up. We're storytellers here, so. But and I was selected. I know that Sasquatch has an emphasis on books that happen in the Pacific Northwest or about Pacific Northwest subjects, and featuring authors and illustrators if they can. So, I mean, here I'm a Portland artist, and originally from Chicago area, and I know that there was one piece they saw in my portfolio that was a watercolor of a vintage, kind of a vintage family in a station wagon on a trip, which was actually my family in a station wagon on a trip with, I think there were 7 of the 8 kids in our family in that car. And from that, that's how they found me, basically. And then once I get the manuscript, there's a slide, but whatever, I can tell you too. I'm a visual person, but I usually, it's somewhat my responsibility, depending on the book, to decide what goes on what page, like what part, where the page turns are, where the action might stop or slow or speed up. And so I spent a lot of time actually staring at the manuscript, doing little doodles on it. I actually have been known to cut the manuscript into sections and lay printer paper on my floor and put a block of text on each page. Even though there's nothing drawn on it, it helps me, and then I can move it around. And I finally will get to the point where I'll do thumbnails, and I kind of sketch everything out. And I'm always looking for pacing, kind of when to slow down and have a big spread. Oh, good. Maybe. It's okay. And when to speed things up by maybe showing a bunch of little spot illustrations in a while. Oh, this is, maybe we can come back to this one if you don't mind. Can you go to the one that's got my studio? I think it's the 3rd one, actually. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. There is only 3 or 4. Yeah, there it is. Here's my process. It's a little bigger than the screen, and I'm sorry for that. But kind of what you're seeing is at the bottom left, those are, that's a thumbnailing page where literally they're, the squares are this big, and you're just kind of trying to figure out how things flow visually from page to page. And then from there, I'll usually move to like larger pencils, and I, cut and paste things together. I do a lot of things digitally now in that stage as far as, actually, it's very technical. I take a picture of the sketch I've done and bring the photo into Procreate, which is a drawing program on my iPad, and that's how I usually do my roughs, and I can pull text in too, and then I send those off to the editor and art director for comments and notes, and I also got notes from Karen and from Nancy, although we didn't talk at all during this process. I wasn't in communication with them until after, except through the art director and editor, because one of the things that I love is the collaborative process, but one of the things I also love is having my own voice while I'm working on the process, because it's kind of like bringing 2 art forms together. And in order for me not to feel stressed about maybe what the author wants or what they originally visualized, I'm kind of working on what I see in the same book. So I don't know how much you want me to talk about.
Well, and here I'll say this. People will say to me, well, did it turn out the way you imagined? And I'll say, oh my gosh, no. It's 1,000 times better than anything I imagined. Because when I'm writing, I see something in my head, but I tend to see it literally. What Sheryl does is bring a brand new vision to it, and it turns out to be a much deeper thing to look at than literal what I say. So that if you turn the pages of this book and you don't even look at the words, you know what the story is. You can feel it. And I have to say with this one, children who, I've had mothers who say they've got children who are non-readers, they just zip right through and they follow all the blue horses, and they start saying, what are the horse, which my husband would say, well, there's an emergent reader. Now they want to know what the words are that go with those beautiful pictures.
And one of the things that Sheryl did, which, I mean, it was really interesting to me to think about, like, Sheryl did this fabulous job of taking this one sentence, which was, she rode her bicycle, which she had named, which she pretended was a horse and had named Charger. Sheryl took that and made, and somehow understood the power, like by imagination, you know, and drew those, everything with the blue illustrations in the book are imaginary, you know, my imagination, and it's hard for me to see that another illustrator could have done that.
It would have portrayed it differently, for
Yeah,
sure. Well, I
yeah.
think for me it was really important. I really connected with the story and with the character of Nancy as your childhood, which obviously I'd never met you, but I was that same kind of kid where, you know, in the corner with a book, nose in a book, and kind of always being left behind places because I couldn't be pulled out of the book or they forgot me. I mean, you know, that did happen, but another story for another time. But I did get left places because I was reading or whatever. But so
Wait, there is, excuse me, let
Sure.
me just say, there is a book called Walter the Lazy Mouse about a mouse who is so slow in, you know, he's the youngest in a big family. I know
Okay.
you were
I
not
was
the
in the middle,
youngest,
yeah.
but you were the middle. But Walter is so slow that
probably pertains
he
to
always
me,
gets left behind. And I think that's one of the books that I got reprinted as a children's book. You should check it out. It's
Oh, I
very-
absolutely
very
will.
good.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, go ahead, sorry.
No, it's totally fine. I appreciate that insight. And I think just when I first got the project, they asked, or was up for the project, I should say, or for the book, I'm sorry, I'm calling it a project. But I was asked by Christy, the editor, to do a sample. They wanted to see if they wanted to make sure I could handle the historical reference. I don't know what they wanted, but what I thought they wanted was to make sure I could handle the architecture of this beautiful library and kind of developing the character of Nancy. And I was so concerned with the sample of making sure the library was, you know, depicted well and architecturally, and there was a sense of light. And I was ready to send the sample in, and at the last minute, I just kind of was like, it just felt a little too dry to me. The sample was the page where Nancy is under the table reading books and the horses are grazing around her, the blue horses. And kind of at the last minute, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I was just like, I just decided to put the horses in there, kind of like bringing, you know, so it was like an inspired moment for me. I don't know where it came from. It was just like, I was always in my head. I understood what that meant. I thought it was important to show that part of your world too. And that's where it started, is with those horses. So yeah, and then I didn't know I was gonna do it with more. There's a bird, the bird that lands on Miss Glenn's desk actually shows up later when you're riding your bike through the map and shows up in front of the library with you too. And kind of, I don't know, just your imaginary friends.
And Karen, how did you respond when you first saw, because the first picture I saw was of the little girl with the two librarians.
Oh, the character study.
With the
Yeah.
character study. And
Okay.
it just kind of, you know, blew me away. It was so wonderful.
I think the first art I saw was Cheryl's attempt to capture Nancy at that age. And so we see her on a bicycle, and there's blue behind her with like scenes from stories. And because this happens in the 1950s, Sheryl had to know, well, what do kids wear then? And you know, Nancy gave me a list of details she could remember about the way these librarians dressed. So they were different looking people, and I saw that, and then Sheryl had to work with one black and white photograph that Nancy saved, and I think I
on the left
understood
side.
something, because it was Nancy.
Like
It was
over that
it was
way.
Nancy on that bicycle, and I thought, this is the only picture she saves from her childhood.
If you go the other way.
And I
sorry.
started to realize,
And then up top.
there, that's the one.
No,
And
but
then up top
high
is the actual
is the
picture.
real picture.
Yeah, it's in the back of the book too, I believe.
Yeah, it is.
So,
And that's when I started to realize
There we go.
the
We airbrushed my sister out of the picture.
And so that's when I started to realize how important that bicycle was to this little girl. That was her best friend. That was her sacred thing. That horse, that metal horse that she rode, and I I knew it, but I didn't feel it until I saw Sheryl turn that bicycle into that blue horse shape, and then it made me cry when I saw that last double spread, because there's adult Nancy and I'll be darned, there's Charger peeking out from behind the tree. So the amazing thing to me about picture books is, yeah, it's planned, but it's not. It's not. Nobody walked into this thinking, oh yeah, there's the bicycle, and it'll be the blue thing, and then we'll have the tree, and it'll say books plus NP, and these things just literally happen like magic.
And Karen did an enormous amount of research for the book. I mean, she got in touch with the Detroit Public Library, the archivist, I think, and he dug up a picture of Miss Whitehead.
And, yeah, it's to the far. There it is.
There's Miss Whitehead.
Yay. And then above is the character study. Well, part of the character. Yeah. This is the character of Nancy, and then that's Miss Whitehead and Miss Long.
Yeah, Miss Whitehead on the right, Miss Long on the left.
When we really started to look at the library itself, COVID happened, and the Francis Parkman Branch Library was closed, so I couldn't get in there. So I just took a shot in the dark and poked around on the internet, like you do, for an hour and a half and found out the name of Mark Bowden is the archivist for the Detroit Public Library, and I said, we're trying to write this book, and bless him, the man believed me that it was really going to happen. So he went through and found these beautiful black and white pictures of how it looked, and then so we could get the details of the lions and the owls out front. And then it finally opened up. So I live in northeastern Ohio, so driving to Detroit was easy. And that's when I stood in front of that building and realized, if you were a tiny 8-year-old girl and you're looking at all she'd ever known was a room in a school that was a library. And she walked into this fabulous place with the soaring ceilings and the stained glass. I mean, I get chills talking about it. And at the entrance, where those every one of those faces underneath has a different expression, which you have to stand there to see it, and it would be beyond reasonable to have asked Sheryl to draw every one of those little.
I did. They're totally the same.
Yeah. But it's just a beautiful building, and thank heavens Detroit saved it. It was built in the 1930s, and it's just exquisite. And so once I could get inside, then I was able to take pictures so Sheryl would know the colors.
Yeah. That was farther along in the process. I can't remember at what point, but because all I had to work from was the black and white photos, and it was also COVID, and kind of my palette, the palette I had created it had more gray tones, and so then I had to go back and pull in kind of a little bit more of the sandstone, and the pictures of the owls saved me that you took, because I had no idea what they looked like, and the pictures that we had from the archives, they're like this big and you can't see anything. So I wanted to at least, I mean, it's an interpretation of them to be sure, but I wanted, because then they come alive and I want them to be able to be that too. But it was really helpful to have those details. I mean, this book, the library itself is a character in the book, and it needed to be represented. So.
Yeah. And I think I never thought that I don't know, I just never thought that somebody who's writing a picture book necessarily needs to do that much research. It seemed to me that it just would come somehow. And the research that Sheryl did and the research that Karen did was just so, so amazing, and it's just kind of humbling to me to, you know, to have the book and everything like that. Are there? Do you all have some? Are there any questions?
Oh wait,
Karen, you
say one thing. Okay. So we didn't cover it here, but when you turn the last page of the book, then there's an authored note where I write more of the facts about Nancy's life and list all the awards and all the recognition, and that Nancy being Nancy, I had to keep shortening my essay because she kept winning more stuff. So I'm just tossing words aside in order to honor her appropriately.
Well, okay. It is hard, I have to say.
Well, Nancy and I have been together for a long time. It was in the late 80s when we worked in that Tulsa bookstore. 85, maybe, I don't know. We moved to Wisconsin. So let me tell the Susie Hinton part. Okay, so it's a slow day in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know, the tumbleweed is blowing past us out there.
And the oil is running,
Yeah.
and you know, there's a lot of money flowing through Tulsa, Oklahoma at that time.
Yeah. So one day, Susie Hinton walks in, who is better known as S.E. Hinton, author of The Outsiders, Rumblefish, That Was Then, This Is Now. And Nancy and I are behind the counter, and I'm, you know, looking at the ceiling, and she's poking me. She's like, look, look. And she said, it's Susie Hinton. And then we stood there just starstruck. And Nancy said to me, oh, Karen, you could write a book. And I said,
can you hear that in the back? Okay, good.
And I said, oh, no, Nancy, I couldn't, but I think you could. And she said, oh, I wouldn't know how. So right then and there, we sealed our fate. You know, we both expected the other one to do it. And we were clueless. We didn't have any idea how. And by golly, we did it, which I say, it tells you what two smart women can accomplish.
There you go.
Okay. Hear, hear. Okay, questions? Yes, Judith.
Favorite horse book when you were...
Oh, my favorite horse book. Well, I have a lot of them. One of the books that I treasure is a signed, an autographed copy of Misty of Chincoteague. That I met her. Detroit used to have every year like a book fair downtown at the Art Museum, or the Historical Museum, I think, and sponsored by the newspaper, the Detroit Free Press, so all the new books were there, and there used to be some authors too. And so I loved Misty of Chincoteague, which everybody's still in print. Most people who are horse people know about it. But another horse book, you're going to regret this question, Judith. Another horse book that I really loved is called Tick Tock and Jim, which is about a boy who trades his father's wristwatch for a horse, and of course gets into big trouble, and they don't believe that he will ever get the wristwatch back. And I'll leave you in suspense as to whether he does or not. It was a children's book. So, Pennies for a Pony. Miss Whitehead was Canadian, and so she really raised me on a diet of British children's fiction. And so, you know, she's the person who gave me The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings. And, you know, now you can go into any bookstore here and pick up The Lord of the Rings, all 3 volumes. But when I read it, we read The Hobbit, and then a few years later, The Fellowship of the Ring came out, the first book. And then we had to wait 2 years till The Two Towers was published. And let me remind you that The Fellowship of the Ring ends with Frodo and Sam running away from Boromir, who has been turned evil by the ring. So, you know, it was hard to wait, let me tell you. Let me tell you. So, and the horse and dog books we're in a separate, we're pulled out from the regular children's books, and we're in a separate place in the library. And if we could go to the library today, I could show you where those books were. I mean, they meant so much to me. So, yeah, yes. Any question? Yes.
Was the Parkland branch a Carnegie Library? I have to
Yes,
ask.
it was not a Carnegie Library, and when I wrote Book Lust, I was under the impression that it was a Carnegie Library because in Carnegie libraries, because Andrew Carnegie believed that you ascended to knowledge, there was always stairs going up to the front door, as there were in the Parkman Library. So very, very confidently in the introduction to Book Lust, I say it was a Carnegie Library. And then, of course, somebody writes to me and says, well, actually, it was not a Carnegie Library. It was built too late to be a Carnegie Library. It was a something else library. But one of the things about the library that we couldn't fit into the manuscript was that there was no public bathroom. Yes, no public bathroom. And if you were a little girl of 8 who has packed her lunch and gone there on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock and didn't ever want to leave, not having a public bathroom was a little bit of an issue. Luckily, there was a gas station around the corner, so they got used to seeing me use their bathroom there.
I'm glad
So,
that came out.
Yes, right.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. I didn't know anything about who Nancy Pearl was until Karen's book came out. And I have a young friend who is a children's librarian here in Bellevue. She can't be here today, she's sorry to say, but she writes, I shared this book help us, and she writes back to me and says, yes, Nancy Pearl is a star in the library world. I took a class from her back in library school, and then when Mom and I traveled to Terrence after my graduation, I took the Nancy Pearl action figure and photographed it around the city, all on the gnome in the movie Amelia. I'm excited that she's getting celebrated with this book.
Oh,
You have inspired others.
thank you. Oh, that's sweet. Any other questions? Yes, Tom.
So Nancy, the library is a character in the book. It's an amazing place. But the pictures I see, it looks like a very big, dark, Gothic, cathedral
Yeah.
almost structure. And it's hard for me to imagine a small girl feeling comfortable in there. Can you remember what it felt like to be in there? Were you intimidated by it?
I wasn't intimidated, I don't think. I think that when you walk in, again, like a Carnegie Library, the first people that you see are at the circulation desk. And they were always smiling and always very friendly. And I do remember, not people's names, but, there was one young man who was working there who was in dental school at the University of Detroit, and he was doing this to earn whatever. So there was that friendliness, and then you had to decide whether you were going to turn to the right to go to the children's area or the left and go to the adult area. And Miss Whitehead, and so it was kind of a natural, I didn't feel, it felt like a place where people welcomed you. And then there were all those books, it was just amazing.
There was that big window in the children's
Oh, and then the
section.
children's room, the children's section, there was like a rounded, like an octagonal. It was like a rounded end of the room.
Gigantic bay window.
Yeah. Oh,
This
Karen knows all that.
massive window that just soars forever, and there's a stained glass panel there that says the Mary Conover Room for Boys and Girls. And so Nancy would have been on that window seat with all that light flooding
Right.
in. So that part of it is not dark and scary like it
Yeah,
appears in
right.
some of those pictures.
Right. And Miss Whitehead wouldn't let me go into the adult area until I was 13. And then she took me there, and made a point of introducing me to the librarians, and then left me to find those books, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, it was just it's just so wonderful to have the library celebrated, and you two did such a marvelous, it was just such a wonderful connection. Thank you.
And the three of us have never been together until today.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
So we're sudden best friends
Right.
out of nowhere.
Yay.
Right. As it should be,
Yeah.
if all goes well. As it did go well. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Well, thank you all again for coming. You could clap if you want. It's okay.